Picture yourself on a late shift, keeping watch over a large working boat that's used for tuna fishing. It's midnight and you're all by yourself, strolling along the piers and checking the boat to make sure no nefarious people are lurking to steal or cause damage to the large vessel. That was what Joseph Fernandes had been doing on the Saturday night of July 7, 1990, before he was stabbed to death. On a boat known as the Sea Quest, the 69-year-old was employed as the night watchman. Following his wedding, he, along with his wife, left Madeira, Portugal, and moved to San Diego. In California, they started a family and had children and grandchildren that loved Fernandes so much. Mary Montgomery, his granddaughter, shared a special bond with her beloved grandfather. She resided just across the street from her grandparents' place and enjoyed visiting them all the time. Fernandes cherished and admired his family, but he was also passionate about his tuna fishing profession. There were times when he would even take his grandchildren along. Mary said, "I remember as a little girl, on his days off, we would come down to the harbor to spend time, hanging around the boats, and sometimes he would take me tagging along with him." Those were some of Mary's finest memories from her early years. Following his retirement from fishing, Fernandes maintained his passion for the industry and started serving as a night watchman on the Sea Quest, a boat berthed at the G Street Pier. However, this would ultimately lead to his tragic demise. On July 8, 1990, when Mary, then 4 years old, learned that her grandfather would not be returning from work, she was crushed. That morning, while aboard the Sea Quest, Fernandes was discovered unconscious and drenched in blood. The night watchman had been stabbed to death in what seemed to be a robbery, between his 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Mary recalls being totally confused when she saw the incident report on the news headlines. She yelled excitedly to her parents as photos of her grandfather holding her as a baby showed up on the news. In July of 2022, during an interview, Mary stated that she recalled pointing at the TV while shouting, "Mom, Mom, Grandpa and I are on TV. When is he going to come home? He's got to see this." It was then that the naive granddaughter realized that something was seriously off. Fernandes's body was discovered by another watchman who arrived at takeover after his shift was scheduled to finish. When the other watchman arrived, he was unable to find him, so he asked a friend to lend a hand in looking for him. When the friend arrived and scoured through the boat with him, they did discover his body. The two then called the police right away to report what they had discovered. Among the first officers to show up at the scene was homicide detective Jim Duncan. Fernandes's body was found at the port side of the vessel in a fish storage area, concealed underneath the plastic sheathing and boat equipment. According to police, Fernandes was evidently attacked in the ship's galley and his body ended up on the lower deck. After speaking with the other dockside boat owners, Duncan learned that nighttime boat thefts were quite common. John Brown, a fisherman, told him that since there were a lot of items being stolen, he kept his dog on the boat at night. Additional research revealed to Duncan that Fernandes's 1984 white Nissan 200 SX was possibly stolen by the assailant, as it was missing from the crime scene. A few weeks later, that car was located in Los Angeles. It seemed to be sold to people who had no involvement in the crime. Moreover, the perpetrator only took cash, so there was no trail for the investigators to follow. With their most important piece of evidence leading to a dead end, the case consequently went cold. The case was not revisited by the investigators until 32 years later in July of 2022. Finally, with fresh set of eyes, they were able to piece together new leads that would eventually point them to Gregorio Arturo Quezada Monsivais as their primary suspect. The problem was that Monsivais took off for Mexico not long after the killing. Senior investigator Tony Johnson of the DA's office discusses why the team considered him a suspect. Numerous pieces of evidence that they had gathered over the years pointed to Monsivais. At first, police thought the murder was a case of robbery gone wrong. While this might have been the case, new investigators on the reopened cold case speculated that it might have been an act of rage. According to the reports, prior to the incident, Fernandes had turned down Monsivais' offer of work. which may have prompted an argument that ultimately ended in Fernandes's demise. Additionally, the police pointed out that multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a man who fit Monsivais' description fleeing the scene around the time of the slaying. Over time, Monsivais also told at least one acquaintance that he had killed someone. That person later reported this to the police. In the end, Monsivais was positively identified by those who bought Fernandes's stolen car after they shared his picture with them. With the help of this gathered evidence, Johnson and his team was able to piece together the events that would ultimately lead Fernandes' killer to face justice. In April of 2023, Monsivais was tracked down and apprehended in the Sinaloa region of Mexico. Fernandes's family can now, at last, receive the closure they have been waiting for the past 3 decades. According to his granddaughter Mary, she felt comforted upon learning that the district attorney's office professionals persisted in their pursuit of justice for her grandfather. Monsivais' trial is still pending. Nevertheless, Mary and the other Fernandes family members believes that the monster would be permanently put behind bars. What do you think? Will Monsivais finally face the consequences of his actions, or will justice remain elusive? Share your thoughts. On February 27, 1999, in the early hours of the morning, Michelle Bright, who was 17 years old at the time, was just wrapping up after a night out with friends. From a birthday party, she was on her way back to her parents' place in New South Wales, Australia. Michelle, though, never arrived home that day. Gulgong, a once peaceful town, was suddenly plunged into mystery, a mystery that would last for 2 decades before eventually the identity of the person who killed Michelle, a man who thought that he had gotten away with it, was discovered. On the evening of February 26, 1999, Michelle asked her mother if she could go to her friend's 15th birthday party, and she happily allowed her. Michelle had been a responsible girl all her life. Additionally, Gulgong, their hometown, was a secured and tight-knit town of less than 2,000 inhabitants. Michelle had a great evening before the celebration came to an end and everybody said their goodbyes. On February 27th, it was early in the morning when Michelle left for the house. Michelle's friends surely thought they would catch up with her at school shortly, but that was not the case. Whilst walking home at some point, 17-year-old Michelle Bright went missing. That morning, when her mother woke up, she was taken aback to find out that Michelle was not in her bedroom. Immediately, they reached out to the police and a search was launched to find her. Had she been drunk and maybe fallen, hurting herself? Perhaps, instead of walking home, Michelle had decided to spend the night with a friend. All of them hoped that there'd be a reason behind Michelle's abrupt disappearance. Her last known sighting was at Main Street, where she was dropped off by a friend at 12:45 a.m. the morning before. However, following a desperate 3-day search, everything came to a sudden stop when they made a horrifying discovery. Michelle Bright's partially clothed body lying beside a railroad track in a long grass patch close to Barney's Reef Road. She was discovered within a kilometer radius from her house. Thousands of leads were pursued by the police, but they were unable to find the person who killed Michelle. The police minister Michael Daly announced that a $500,000 reward was being offered by the government of New South Wales for solving Michelle's case. In NSW, this is the second highest reward publicly offered. People in Gulgong were debating about the bizarre deed. They were speculating about who they believed could be responsible. In a small town like that, there was an inherent feeling of watching over your shoulder. Every day the people would question whether the offender was among them. This feeling lingered for years. It wasn't until decades later it came to light that the perpetrator had quietly gotten away 2 weeks after the body was found. From Gulgong, he went to live just outside of Sydney. He thought that he had escaped justice. For Michelle's case, there seemed to be no resolution in sight. Over the course of the investigation, 5 people had come out as suspects. There wasn't any conclusive evidence linking them to Michelle's slaying, so couldn't do much. The case eventually went cold. The idea that the person responsible was still at large, living their life without facing punishment, was something that those who knew and adored Michelle had to deal with. The year 2019 followed an important turning point in the case. The job of investigating Michelle's case fell to a team of detectives. After going through everything they had at their disposal once more, they were able to reduce the number of people on the suspect list from 5 to 2. One of them was Craig Henry Rumsby, a 50-year-old father of 4 children. He used to live next door to the Bright family. Certain that Rumsby is their suspect, they started an undercover police operation to gain his friendship. It all started in November 2019 when Rumsby got together with some people he believed to be gang members. An elaborate plot was devised involving a dirty cop, a large sum of money to be made, and a mysterious higher-up known only as the Big Boss. But all of this was just made up. For the following 8.5 months, Rumsby did a number of errands for the gang. The members persisted in emphasizing the value of loyalty to them. The corrupt police officer entered the story in March 2020. In his conversation with this undercover cop, Rumsby revealed that the police had made an effort to tie him to Michelle's murder. 5 months passed as the group worked to strengthen their connection with Rumsby. Subsequently, numerous people started calling Rumsby to notify him that the police were digging into him over some case. One of them made it clear to Rumsby that before anything else happens, this needs to be handled as we can't do anything if there's heat on one of us. On August 10, 2020, the reward money went up to $1 million. "It is so sad they have not caught her perpetrator," Rumsby said in response to the appeal posted on the NSW Police Force Facebook page. "To me, Michelle was like a sister. I feel sorry for the family." Then Rumsby was summoned to see the boss. He said to Rumsby that he was a suspect in 2 cases, and the attention was causing problems for the family. And at that point, the trap was laid. Rumsby heard the boss tell him, "If you are not being honest with me, mate, I cannot help you. The unfortunate result of that is that we can't keep working together." At first, he pretended to be innocent and told the boss he had no knowledge of the case. Approximately 2 hours later, Rumsby was shown copies of police files and records, along with a picture of his red Ford Falcon. In 1999, not long after moving, Rumsby was called in for a phone interview with the police regarding Michelle's case. The following day, his then-owned red Ford Falcon was completely destroyed by fire. In a quiet but serious voice, he started providing details to the boss on how he killed Michelle. He covered her mouth with his hand until her breathing stopped. He claimed that around 11 p.m., he left his neighbor's house and drove to another friend's place before proceeding into Gulgong in his red Ford Falcon. He made a stop at the post office hotel before visiting the commercial hotel for a chat with the publican. He acknowledged that he might have left there and headed in a specific direction, but he insisted he didn't remember anything more about that day and what transpired with Michelle. The boss proposed that Rumsby's memory might be refreshed by having his associates take him to Gulgong. They would then take him to Mudgee, from where he would be flown to Ballina that evening in a chartered plane for hiding. Later that night, Rumsby described dragging Michelle by her hands into the scrub on Barney's Reef Road in Gulgong so her body could not be discovered. He said to the guy that, although he acknowledged pulling Michelle's bra down, he wasn't sure if he had assaulted her. Rumsby claimed that after finishing, he went home, showered, had another beer, cleansed his clothes, and went to bed. The following day, Craig Rumsby was placed under arrest. The pandemic caused significant strain on the legal system, and Rumsby's trial was not held until May 2023. Following 7 challenging weeks, the jury returned a guilty verdict. On August 7th, Justice Robert Allen Hume handed down a 32-year prison sentence. It will take Craig Rumsby 24 years to be eligible for parole, which means that he will be 77 years old by the time he's finally granted release. Michelle's case was ultimately resolved owing to a team of experienced and committed law enforcement officers. They were all determined to ensure that she received justice. Craig Rumsby may have escaped punishment for his actions for 20 years, but at least he will most likely live out the remainder of his life on Earth in prison, where he belongs. What are your thoughts on the ethical and strategic dimensions of this police approach? Do you think there were earlier opportunities missed that could have brought Rumsby to justice sooner? Who do you believe holds responsibility for the delay in solving this case? Dive into the discussion in the comments below and share your insights on what could have been done differently. From a young age, Burt Mann had a passion for history, especially the history of the American Civil War. Likewise, he enjoyed classical music and opera. He was born and raised in Graham, Texas, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Zoology from the University of Texas at Austin. Furthermore, he served as a Navy corpsman with the U.S. Marines in Vietnam. In 1994, Burt, then 46-year-old, along with his wife Dawn, resided in the 2500 block of Stargrass Circle in South Austin, Texas. On May 12th of the same year, when Dawn returned home, she stumbled upon the lifeless body of her husband lying on the floor. It seemed that a burglar had managed to break into their house from the back door, and he was still inside when Burt came back from work. A struggle broke out between the two next to the front door, where Burt ended up sustaining multiple stab injuries and succumbed to them. The crime shocked the police because apparently those who commit property crimes, such as burglary, usually run away as soon as they get caught rather than getting involved in any sort of confrontation. Also, both the break-in and the slaying took place in the middle of the afternoon, when parents were likely to be returning home from work and children were to be from school. Police believed that the suspect had escaped out the back door of Mann's house and into the woods behind the house. Moreover, they discovered blood other than Mann's at the crime scene, suggesting that the burglar had been injured, as Burt tried to fight him off, and his blood had been left inside the house after he fled. Over the next few years, the case had more than 20 detectives working on it. In 2005, the Austin Police Department established a cold case unit. Subsequently, the blood stain that had been recovered from the crime scene was sent to the lab for DNA testing. A DNA profile was successfully created from the blood stain, yet no match to it was found in the combined DNA index system. In March of 2023, the DNA profile was submitted to Bode Technology, hoping that they would be able to identify the suspect using genetic genealogy, and they did just that in June of that year. The man whom they believed to have killed Burt had not even been a suspect in the case. That man was Kenneth Wayne Robbins, who lived in Lubbock, Texas, and worked as a long-haul truck driver. Authorities tried to covertly retrieve stuff thrown away by Robbins to test that for DNA, but their efforts proved to be unsuccessful. Consequently, on September 8, 2023, detectives from Austin drove to Lubbock along with a search warrant to take a DNA sample from Robbins. They found Robbins at his work, served the search warrant, and collected the DNA sample from him. He declined to talk to them. 5 days later, Robbins's employer, who was certainly mindful that the department had an eye on him, reached out to the Austin Police Department. They claimed that the GPS tracker in the truck Robbins was driving at the time suggested that it was parked at a truck stop in Weatherford, Texas, and that it had been there for what they believed to be an unusually extended period of time. Austin police got in touch with their Weatherford colleagues and requested them to do a welfare search. Upon accessing the truck, they discovered Robbins' lifeless body inside. An autopsy revealed that he had taken his own life. On February 8, 2024, the Austin Police Department announced that they had identified Robbins as the only man responsible for Burt's demise. The DNA sample taken from him matched that from the crime scene, and if he hadn't committed suicide, he would have faced capital murder charges. Not all of Burt's family lived to witness the identification of his purported assailant. His father departed from life in 2019, while his mother, Virginia, passed away only a year before the case was concluded. Eventually, Burt's widow and younger sister did learn who stole Burt from them. Kathy May, Mann's younger sister, said it's been emotional hearing the news almost 30 years later. "I always felt like
I could walk past Robbins on the street and not even know it, May said. We don't have that big question hanging over our hearts. I had really kind of given up hope that it would happen, and I'm so grateful. May went on to say that while her family can now start the healing process, she is still very saddened for Robbins's family after finding out the news all these years later. They stay on my mind all the time because I can't imagine learning this after nearly 30 years within your son and husband and father's background, May said. APD still asks that anyone with any additional information about this crime call the Cold Case Unit at 512-974-5250. Tips may also be submitted anonymously online or by calling the Capital Area Crime Stoppers program at 512-472-8477. In May of 1974, Connecticut State Police got a report about 2 killings that had happened at a house on Shoeville Road in Ledyard, Connecticut. Detectives conducted a search of the property and its surroundings. Soon after, they discovered the partially decaying bodies of a man and a woman in shallow graves within 100 feet proximity of the house. The man was subsequently identified as Gustavus Lee Carmichael, a convicted serial bank robber who had fled from custody. He had carried out multiple bank robberies and all over the country until in 1970, when he was arrested for stealing $60,000 from a bank in New Jersey. In addition, he was found guilty of a number of crimes throughout his life, including theft, grand larceny, attempted theft, abduction, assault and battery, and armed robbery. But in October 1970, while being transferred from a Massachusetts prison to a federal court in Hartford, Connecticut, he and another prisoner managed to flee, leading the FBI to issue a federal warrant for his arrest. While on the run, he eventually came across a woman, and they started referring to each other as Dirk and Lorraine Stahl. They were lodging at the residence of fellow bank robbers Donald Brandt and Richard DeFreitas. DeFreitas and Brandt had multiple safe houses that were used for housing fugitives who were trying to evade capture. However, the woman Lorraine Stahl confessed to DeFreitas' wife that she feared the lifestyle they were presently living. DeFreitas alerted Brandt of her worries, and together they made the decision to get rid of the woman because they feared if she was to be caught, it would expose all of their illegal activities. Considering the anticipated difficulty of only eliminating the woman without Carmichael's likely intervention, they decided to get rid of him as well. The authorities believe that Carmichael and the woman had been slain on December 31, 1970, 4 years prior to when their bodies were discovered. Carmichael and the woman were shot dead by DeFreitas and Brandt, who then disposed of their bodies in the dump, where they remained undiscovered for more than 3 years. In the end, Richard DeFreitas and Donald Brandt were prosecuted, found guilty, and sentenced of the crimes, and have passed away since. Although the man who was shot was named, the woman's identity was never revealed, as she'd been using an alias that wasn't ever verified. Before going by the name Lorraine Stahl, she went by Connie and Sandy. She was reportedly known to drive a 1964 green Oldsmobile with either Maine or Massachusetts number plates. Later on, the car was discovered abandoned in Hartford, with a Maine registration sticker still attached to the license plate. Additionally, she may have had an employment history in New York City. Following the discovery of their bodies, the woman's jewelry and clothing were retrieved by the police, along with her tan leather wet-look vest, gold or tan sweater, brown tweed skirt, and a brown pair of so-called granny boots. The state police also said that she had on a couple of rings and a pendant. She had a glass that bore the letters JHSN, along with the initials ILN and the year 1917. For over 5 decades, Lorraine Stahl's identity remained unknown. In 2011 and 2012, her case was uploaded to the CODIS database and the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. However, she still remained unidentified. After that, in 2022, DNA samples were provided to Othram's laboratory, which allowed them to create the victim's DNA profile. In January 2024, the profile enabled to establish a connection with the victim's sister. Furthermore, they learned that the victim had a daughter who volunteered for a DNA sample. It wasn't long after Lorraine Stahl was identified as Linda Sue Childers. Born on September 4, 1946, Childers was a native of Louisville, Kentucky. Her sister and daughter were informed of the news, and the case was finally solved after over 5 decades. As we close the chapter on this haunting tale from Ledyard, Connecticut, the mystery of Linda Sue Childers' life and untimely demise continues to stir the imagination. What led a woman from Louisville, Kentucky, to intertwine her fate with a notorious fugitive? Were there unseen forces or desperate circumstances that pushed her into the shadows of the criminal underworld? And more intriguingly, what stories and secrets died with her that cold December night? This case may be solved, but the echoes of the past linger, inviting us to ponder the untold narratives hidden within. I encourage you to share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. What do you think was the real story behind Linda's drastic transformation into Lorraine Stahl? Could there be more layers to this mystery waiting to be uncovered? In Ormond Beach, Florida, 16-year-old Autumn Lane McClure resided with her grandmother. She was a student at Mainland High School. On May 10, 2004, when Autumn failed to come home, her grandma contacted the sheriff's office and reported her missing. Her last known sighting was with her boyfriend. After being interviewed by the police, Autumn's boyfriend said that he had dropped her off at the Volusia Mall and hadn't seen her since. The teenager was then officially deemed as missing. A search operation was conducted, but nothing was found. Later, investigators were notified by Autumn's grandmother that Autumn had contacted her from a different area code and that she had received a few letters from Autumn addressed to Melbourne, Florida, in which Autumn assured them that she was well and would return home by the time she turned 18. After a while, investigators got to learn that Autumn had been staying with a couple at their place, Brian Donnelly and Jessica Freeman. When investigators arrived at the couple's home, they were told that Autumn had been living with them for a few days before leaving. They claimed to be Autumn's co-workers at the Winn-Dixie supermarket. They informed the detectives that Autumn did not get along with her grandmother and that they had let her spend a few days in their trailer. Nevertheless, they had no further information. After that, the case was shelved. Despite this, the investigators didn't give up. They collected DNA from family members and uploaded it to a national database for missing children. The case stayed unsolved until 12 years later, when investigators again spoke with the boyfriend. This time, though, Autumn's boyfriend confessed that he had lied to them before about dropping her off at the Volusia Mall. He added that in actuality, he had dropped her off at the Seabreeze Bridge, from where she went on to get into a car with Jessica Freeman. Jessica was presently residing in Nevada and was located by the detectives. She asserted that she was unaware of Autumn's disappearance. Authorities finally had their breakthrough when a source revealed to them that Freeman and Donnelly were both implicated in Autumn's disappearance. Freeman was interrogated by the police once more, and this time she requested immunity in exchange for answering questions. Freeman admitted to the detectives that she and Autumn were co-workers, so that she and Donnelly had given her permission to stay with them at her trailer. Freeman disclosed that she had been involved in a sexual relationship with the couple. Freeman stated to investigators that one day she got back home and witnessed Donnelly allegedly choking Autumn in the bathroom. She remembers that she couldn't save Autumn's life and thereby left the trailer where the three of them resided together. When she came back 2 weeks later and asked about what had happened to Autumn, Donnelly allegedly threatened her to keep her mouth shut, or else the same thing would happen to her. Donnelly is said to have spoken with Freeman multiple times over the years about how he had dismembered and buried Autumn. She claimed that she wasn't aware of where Donnelly had buried her body. However, Freeman informed officials in late 2023 that she suspected Autumn's body might have been buried underneath the trailer, since Donnelly had displayed relief over the recently poured concrete at the site. Authorities scanned the surface using ground-penetrating radar and discovered patches where the density of the soil differed from the surrounding dirt. Following that, the authorities dug up the remains, cooperating with the new owner of the property on the site. In February of 2024, authorities claimed to have retrieved 99.9% of Autumn's remains. To verify her identity, they were brought to the medical examiner. Sadly, Donnelly passed away in 2022, making it impossible to prosecute him even though Autumn's body was eventually found. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of cold cases.